All right. So good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar. And just to introduce, if you are new to Historywalas, we are a small outfit who work in the space of history and heritage. Across all kinds of history and heritage. This series of webinars is something we have been doing for the last couple of months, and we hope to continue it for some other time. And we have been lucky that many scholars and researchers have been generous with their time and knowledge and their work to be able to spend time with us and share their work with us. So and yeah, so do follow us on Facebook, Instagram, so that you can join our programs in the future as well, right? About today's webinar, of course, it's as exciting as it can be because we're talking about Indian film history, something which the kind of importance films have played in our lives in India or in our society, in Indian society. We all are aware of some of the film history, uh, even though we might not study it in school or college as a subject in film studies or something, right? But even with all that, right? So we possibly we would have heard of like Indian silent cinema, the golden decade of Hindi cinema, then the Indian new wave, so many kind of classifications and genres and studies which still continue to be done. But with all this expansive focus on Indian cinema, especially the Indian, Bombay cinema, right? We have still, we see very less conversation around the genres like horror or science fiction, right? So that's why we found this work of Professor Rashmi Soni very interesting because it's something which is almost like a sub culture within the Bombay cinema, this whole science fiction, Indian science fiction, which at least I wasn't aware of when I first came across her work in this space, right? So we thought this is very interesting to introduce and allow Rashmi to share her work with us. And it has been a pleasure knowing Rashmi and also thankful to her for joining us. About Rashmi Soni, Rashmi Soni is a scholar, a film scholar. She teaches at the Christ University in Bangalore, and of course she has published a lot of papers and also edited books on film studies, and also has curated visual art exhibitions, right? And we'll also, you will find a more detailed bio, of course, in the chat as well, and you would have already seen it in the webinar email as well, right? So with that brief intro, I will let Rashmi begin her talk. Just a couple of logistics. As what we will try to do is take questions at the end, unless it is something which needs to be addressed at that particular point during Rashmi's talk. So whatever questions you might have, I request you all to please type in the chat, and we will find time at the end to address each of them. So thank you again for joining us. Rashmi, all over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Basav. I hope I'm audible. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, thanks for the invitation. And, I think it's been really interesting for me to sort of revisit this material because this is not the mainstay of my work. I don't really work on science fiction cinema. I happened to stumble upon this body of material sort of by accident and around about 2014 and 2015. So I just want to kind of, contextualize it and talk about actually that experience of stumbling upon a body of material in the archive and then looking at other material outside the archive. So this is really based on what I'm, so what I'm going to be talking about today is already has been published some 6 years ago in 2015 now. And this is the journal in which it was published. It's published by Intellect UK, and I have a short article about 1960s B science fiction cinema in this journal issue, which I'd edited, which has also a lot of other interesting contributions. I know that you can't see the titles and the contributors, but I wanted to show you this because I'm very fond of this image that you see on the cover, which is a artwork by a friend, artist friend, Mochu, whose video work also I'm very fond of. And I thought this was a good image to share because Mochu contributed to this particular issue. But this, what he contributed was a visual essay, which was based on the autobiography of a psychoanalyst called Wilfred Bion. And it's interesting because Kumar Shani, who's an experimental filmmaker, was excuse me, was also actually trying to make a film on this autobiographical book. It's called Memoir of the Future. And it remained an unfinished film. And the whole story of the making of the film, the aesthetic treatment, as well as, you know, why it remained unfinished and so on, is in itself a very interesting kind of episode, which I'm not going to get into. But I thought that this image also, in some sense, then addressed the manner in which I now consolidate my thoughts around the whole genre of science fiction, particularly in film. Okay, sorry, yeah. So what happened is that in 2014, I was teaching at the Jawaharlal Nehru University at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, and I wanted to do something a little bit more fun than teaching the regular Indian film history or film theory. And I used to offer an elective course in science fiction cinema. And what happens in the School of Arts and Aesthetics is that we take our MPhil students to the National Film Archive in Pune every year, because it's seen as part of their sort of methodological training for their PhD and MPhil research, to navigate the archive and to kind of understand and work through various approaches to the construction of film history. So in 2015, when we went to the film archive, I was already teaching this course in science fiction, and I had, on my list, there was Blade Runner and Alien and Alphaville and La Jetée and so on, but I had not a single Indian film. I had some manga and anime and so on. And it wasn't that it was bothering me that I couldn't find a film from India or South Asia to put on the course, but that thought remained in my mind as to, why and so on. And so what happened when we went to the film archive, the National Film Archive in Pune, is, sorry, my slides are not moving, Basar.
It had moved, it came back, I think. So can you try again? Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. All right. So what happened in the archive is that, these, and I'm sure many of you here will have visited the archive and are very familiar and perhaps even have worked in collaboration with the archive. But the JNU visits are kind of very special because it's like going with a war strategy of some sort, and I'm not going to elaborate on this at great length because this talk is being recorded. But there are strategies of distraction and how do you maximize your 1 week, and how do you find the material that you want to find, because it's not very easy to find what you want to find, especially given that we have only a week's time there. So I'm not going to be talking extensively about that, but it's an experience in itself, and I don't think it's possible for me to separate that process of engaging with the archive and the particular way in which that archive kind of demands that you need to engage with it in a short span of time, from the work that actually emerged accidentally in my research in this area. And I had gone looking for some other material, and I suddenly kind of started coming across names of films which were made in the 1960s, which sounded very, very fascinating. These were all descriptions of professions, or, journeys to many different places. So there was kind of a sense of people being professionals of various kinds, as well as of travel in some sense. And most of them were films that I had never heard of. So I abandoned the project that I had gone to work on, and I kind of started getting distracted and diverted to, looking into some of these films or names of directors. One which really stuck in my mind was a person called Aku, who has made a handful of films. And I haven't really been able to find out much else about Aku, but I really kind of hope one day I will. And I think this connects to my main area of work, which has been around women filmmakers and sort of, constructing history of women's work in cinema going back to the early 20s. So I think that training and that kind of interest in the construction of historical accounts or speculative historical accounts really caught my attention in this case as well. And I'm talking of this in retrospect now. At that time when this was happening, I couldn't quite, really make sense of why I was doing what I was doing. So I started looking at newspaper reports of course, this is the 1960s, which is, the great space race. And it's so, weird and strange that today, as I speak, we're still in that very same moment of the conquest of space and who goes, whether it's, Elon Musk or somebody else who goes into space first, except that it's now not nation, but it's corporate. So it's also kind of interesting point in our history, our time, to look back upon some of this material. And I started collecting very interesting reports from newspapers around questions of science. And there were many. I mean, there was a huge kind of reporting of stories around science, the ethics of, whether science itself is good or bad, or is it its utilization, which is, really, I mean, is it a moral question, an ethical question? What is it? I also started looking at, media coverage of films that were being shown in the 1950s and the 1960s. And of course, we know that it was a very global kind of film exhibition context, and one got to saw all kinds of films in both urban as well as rural towns. So these are just some examples that I have collated here. And this one in particular is interesting. The Battle in Outer Space comes to the Strand because this is a particular kind of technique. The tohoscope is an anamorphic lens. So there's a lot of kind of history of technology, of film technology, which was also interwoven into the history of science fiction. And really, I think that is primarily what grabbed my kind of keen interest in this area. So this is Gogola, which is, you will all recognize the creature, right? And this is our version of Godzilla. And I'm showing you all this. This is all material that I've gathered from the archives. So of course, there is that kind of, great excitement of finding things and the material object and so on. But I'm also showing this to draw attention to the fact that it was a very international context, and there was influence and information coming in from many different parts of the world, not just from Hollywood films or American films. So this is from a song booklet, and again, these are objects that perhaps even my generation really hasn't seen this, but I do know that in my parents' generation, these were very commonly sold at a very cheap rate, and people would, buy song booklets for every new film that came out. And these booklets were always produced in multiple languages. So you would have English, Hindi, Urdu, and perhaps sometimes Gujarati or Marathi as well. And the thing that I find really fascinating in these booklets is the description of labor, right? So here, if you look at, I don't know if you can read this, but there is a column called Cinetrix and Effect Service, Effects Processing. And I started getting very interested in how are these films being made, because this was all celluloid. And, there was a whole kind of flourishing industry around special effects and optical illusion and, all of this. So this is before digital VFX, of course. And a lot of these studios that had started specializing in doing special effects work, of course, have now closed down. And that history, again, is a history that remains to be written in the history of Indian cinema. So I had got interested in science fiction, not because I was a science fiction fan while growing up. I was interested in it, but I was not kind of, the fan as you would kind of imagine hardcore science fiction consuming person. I got into this really because of the history of technology, the history of labor, and the kind of very, very global, cosmopolitan, multiculturalism that really emerges through these documents. And also to try and understand what is this really in the context of the kind of work that I'm now currently doing or interested in, which is independent filmmaking or visual arts work, and this whole kind of question around jugaad, and how do the crafts industry and how do people make things. Also, in a more philosophical sense, I have recently been teaching courses on culture and technology, looking at the kind of intersection between the human, non-human, machinic, and so on. But I'm not going to be talking about that in this presentation. We'll just stick to science fiction. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I was at Gogola, and this is a story again in the Times of India about a Japanese special effects master, E.G. Suburaya. And you can't read this again, but I wanted to show you this because if you've seen the images, they're kind of constructing models of objects to use in their films. And this is one of our special effects geniuses, Babubhai Mistry. There were a bunch of them. There was Rusi Bilimoria and Babubhai Mistry. And Babubhai Mistry in particular was very kind of renowned for his work, starting from the 1930s in fantasy films and action films, and then moving on to science fiction films. He was known as Kala Dhaga because he had sort of mastered this trick of making, creating illusions, basically using a simple black thread. And I also got very interested in this kind of, little trick or jugaad that one uses to go about your work. So there is a whole history which I haven't been able to sort of work on to do with these production studios and the crafts context of the 1960s, because that kind of will require moving across Bombay, Madras. A lot of these films were actually produced in Madras, and so it wasn't only a Bombay film production. There was quite a lot of South Indian directors have produced these films, and so on. So this is these are images from the song booklet of a film called Dr. Shaitan. And I want to show you this because, again, of course, you can't read this, but I will read it out to you to demonstrate how sort of directors of these films are very conscious of positioning them in an international and national context. So I'm just going to read this out. This is a letter that I found in the archive, which is part of the publicity material. It says, "Dear exhibitor, we have great pleasure in offering you Bora Brothers' Dr. Shaitan for the year 1960, the most novel type picture," and I'm going to read it with all the typos and errors in grammar, okay? The most novel type picture of Indian film industry. It will be ready for release in the month of February 1960. Though style and setup being American, it is a Hollywood brand Indian picture in Hindi, ever produced in the history of Indian film industry. Two great problems today before the big power of the world are: one, peaceful coexistence and means to it application of atomic energy for the welfare of mankind or for destruction. The existence of the world depends upon peace. If war is encouraged and atomic energy applied for destruction, then in this world of science, this Sputnik age, the humanity will be wiped out. This picture features Dr. Shaitan, a great research scientist, well advanced in the research of atomic energy, his ultimate aim being to acquire powers. On the other side, we have Dr. Ashok, equally well advanced in the field, a competitor of Dr. Shaitan. He works for the welfare of mankind, and hence there is a clash between the two, Dr. Ashok and Dr. Shaitan, in field as well as in laboratory. Atom bombs attack on two Japanese cities in 1945 against the principles of humanity. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has described as a symbol of incarnate evil. One patient who was there at the time is suffering from the effect of atomic rays, and so on and so forth, right? So it goes on, and it highlights this, the theme being use of atomic energy for welfare of mankind and not for destruction. Okay. So now, of course, there is reference to the nuclear blast of the mid 40s and so on. But 1960s is also the decade when India has two major wars with China and with Pakistan. And this is, again, a still publicity still from a film called Wahan Ke Log, which is directed by N.A. Ansari, who's also acted in the film. You can see him here. And one of the very interesting parts of this kind of work is actually the posters, which you can see in this one is a very there's a particular kind of style of making the artwork, and again these are histories that have not really been traced. There is some work on Hindi Bollywood posters, but there isn't a lot of work that has been done on posters that were made for horror films or sci-fi films and the other kind of underbelly of the mainstream cinema in some sense. And here again you will see that this is the construction of some kind of a spaceship or some space, and these objects and knobs and things that were used to evoke the idea of some kind of technological progress became very interesting to me. And it turns out, ironically, that of course Wahan Ke Log is nothing about science fiction. And I should qualify this, because if there are any science fiction fans in the audience, then I must apologize and admit that I'm not strictly talking about science fiction in the way in which it might be understood in vis-a-vis American films, but I'm talking of it in a broad sense to include science fiction and fantasy both, which I would like to comment upon at the end of my presentation about this strict separation between science and fantasy, and it's kind of very peculiar position in the Indian subcontinent. This is a song booklet from a film called The Return of Mr. Superman, and I wanted to show this to you because just to give you a sense of the way in which the songs are all presented. So all of these films had very major singers singing songs for them, and although most of the films are not really available, A Trip to the Moon is available, Wahan Ke Log is available, a few others, Mr. X in Bombay, which has Kishore Kumar, is available, but a lot of the kind of really small made by run of the mill directors films are, we don't know where they are. I mean, they're not in the archive. They may be with a private collector, they may be lost. We really just don't know at the moment. So all that we have to go by in terms of constructing this kind of historical account are the song booklets, are the publicity booklets, and any little media reportage that one can find. But what is interesting is that over the years, and this is increasingly so, and I think this is something that would affect and be experienced by a lot of people who are doing historical research, looking at older documents, that in the digital sphere, digital objects keep appearing, new digital objects keep appearing. So over the last few years, I have found songs uploaded, right, without any videos, because most often without videos, barring one or two exceptions. And these are all songs sung by Mukesh, Mohammad Rafi, like very, very established singers. So in the musicality of these films, there wasn't the mainstream and the, there wasn't the A and the B industry that seems to kind of pertain to the visuality of the film, but not the musicality of the film. And it was interesting to kind of try and understand how the industry works in terms of its production infrastructure differently across the different aspects of filmmaking. Um, okay. Now, this is a script, and this was really what really came to my rescue in doing this research. This is a script of a film called Madam Zapata, and they all had really imaginative, really wonderful titles to the films. And this is what I really spent a long time going through. This particular script is in English, but most of the scripts that I found were in Hindi, written in Devanagari. Some of them were even handwritten, so it was very difficult to read them. But thankfully these scripts are there, because the regulation says that every film produced, the script must be deposited in the film archive. So if you look at the page to, I don't know whether it's to your left or right, but basically where you can see the number of reels and the footage, in many cases there was also description of the censored or the deleted. So here you can see numbers like 32 feet deleted, 6 feet deleted, right? So this required a different kind of literacy to be able to read these scripts, as opposed to the usual kind of approach that a film researcher would have, which would be to watch the film and read the visuals of the film, but to read all of this, what one might call metadata, that actually lay behind the film, was part of the process in some sense, became very exciting and also quite challenging in many ways. Now, in this particular script, and I'm showing you this one in particular, because the film archive is two of these. They have two scripts for this film, and if you look at this, you'll see that dialogues have been pasted in Devanagari on this script, which is probably typed and printed in English. The other script is entirely in English. So in some sense, these documents also became material objects that began to feature in my own work. And though I haven't yet done much about the material aspect of this, in the sense that the work that I produced out of engaging with this material in the archive has really been a overview and account of some of the industrial formations, or methods of craftsmanship and so on, as well as some reading of the aesthetic of these films. But I haven't really worked on the materiality of the documents themselves, which is something that I would love to do at some point. And if there are other people who would like to collaborate on this kind of work, then I'd be very happy to take that conversation forward. So this is going to be the last film that I talk about. And this is a really, really remarkable film. It was made in 1962, and it's directed by Nanabhai Bhatt, who is Mahesh Bhatt's father, Alia Bhatt and Pooja Bhatt's grandfather, and was, very I think he made about close to 100 films across these genres of science fiction and action and fantasy and so on. And I'm showing you here the script for this film. Now, I should sort of explain a little bit why I say that this is a really very special film and I'm going to tell you now about the narrative of the film, which is that to cut a very, very long-winded story short, the film is about a scientist father and his daughter called Shashi, And I think the Jawaharlal Nehru Indira Gandhi connection here really isn't lost on us, in the sense that all of this is happening in the 1960s. And this scientist makes a rocket to go into space, which is supposed to land on the moon. Now, 1964, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is also the decade when television has come to India, or perhaps it's the end of the 1950s. And he broadcasts on national television that he's made this rocket and he's looking for young people to go into outer space on this journey. A week goes by and nobody really replies to his advertisement on television. Nobody wants to go into space. In the meanwhile, of course, there are aliens from outer space who have been coming to Earth and abducting people. And finally, his daughter Shashi says that I will go to space. So she and her boyfriend, Ravi, I think his name is, decide to train themselves and get trained and get into this rocket. Now, what I'm showing you here is part of the description of this scene in which the rocket is supposed to fly out into outer space. And the first time I saw these scripts, actually, I was quite blown away, because, the expectation or the imagination one has is that these are perhaps not directors who are very well versed in film language or understanding of visual aesthetics, and they're making cheap, low budget B films and full of thrills and so on. But there were scenes which described the use of very, kind of techniques which one would really have to be literate in understanding film technology and film aesthetics to be able to use these terms. So Dutch angle shot and so on. And one of the common assumptions also that we have about Indian cinema is that it doesn't have scripts. We don't work on the basis of scripts. It's only the very, professional kind of filmmakers who have scripts and so on. But as I was going through many of these scripts, and you will notice this, I mean, I'm sure this isn't legible here to you, but let me just attempt to read a few things out. So here, this is reel number something I can't see, but there's a mid-close shot, and Shashi or Ravi, and apologies to those who don't understand Hindi. So, there's a description and there are the dialogues and so on. Rocket में बैठे हैं, close shot meter, long shot, रॉकेट आसमान में जाता हुआ, मिड क्लोज शॉट, रवि और शशि बैठे हैं, रवि शशि की तरफ देखकर कहता है फुल स्पीड पर जा रहा है, एक्सट्रीम लॉन्ग शॉट, रॉकेट स्पेस में even I can't read this, sorry, something
space में गुजर
something है, हाँ, I can't, cut, long shot, धरती पर रेज आती हुई समथिंग, कट, क्लोज शॉट, एक आदमी ग्राफ पर नोट करता हुआ, कट, क्लोज शॉट, एक हाथ कुछ लिखता हुआ, कट, लॉन्ग शॉट, लड़कियां स्विच पर बैठी हुई काम कर रही है, कट, क्लोज अप, व्हाटएवर, ब्रेक हाथ, something, break heart, something prop par likhta. Okay, sorry, this is just like, I need it larger to be able to read it also. But you get what I'm trying to say, that, there's a very, very detailed description of how this scene was to be visualized. And of course, the film is not there. So one of the things that I found myself having to do is to really reconstruct an imagined visual through these directions that were provided on these pieces of paper. And I did a mathematical calculation about, the number of feet in listed there in terms of how long this is, and converted it back in terms of speed of projection and so on. And it's possible that, it seems to me likely that this entire shot is probably close to about 10 or 11 minutes of, the rocket flying into outer space, which I think is quite remarkable. So anyway, to kind of, conclude and go back to these histories that sorry, to go back to this film, and why it's so special is that what happens when Shashi and her boyfriend take off on this flight is that the flight doesn't land on the moon, but it lands on Mars. And it turns out that Mars is a planet of women. And the aliens that have been descending upon Earth and abducting people from the Earth have been from this planet. And so Shashi and Ravi kind of land on the planet. There's a queen of Mars, of course. There are always queens in outer space, never kings, which is also interesting. And this queen of Mars gets interested in Ravi, and it's a fairly erotically charged kind of script. But Ravi and Shashi make friends with a woman called Sakina, who has also been abducted from Earth to live on this planet, and they escape in the rocket. And of course, they do land on the moon, which is where they're supposed to go. But what happens, and this is quite remarkable, what happens is when they leave Mars, and by the time they are getting to the moon, and this is all that I have only been able to figure out through the script, is that suddenly Ravi starts disappearing from the script. We really don't know what he's doing. And Sakina and Shashi become very good friends. And so it turns out that when this rocket actually lands on the moon, the nation is watching this moon landing on national television. And what is enacted is a love song between Sakina and Shashi. And that's really kind of the last, closing shot of the film. Now, we don't know if the love song was intended to be a love song between them, or whether it was some other form of friendship that was being displayed, whether the disappearance of Ravi was mere coincidence, or whether it was meant to be that way for other reasons. But what I certainly found was that in some of these scripts, they were subversive in a way that I think perhaps mainstream Hindi or any other cinema could not have been in that decade, or even after that. And partially some of the reason to do with this is the kind of gaze of the censor board, and how much attention is paid to these films, and who are the possible viewers of such films, right? So I think there's a whole interesting discussion around the exhibition and viewership of these films, and also their place in national cinema, but also what they have been able to do and get away with very successfully, along with, of course, the great artistic and craftsmanship dimensions that are linked to these films. So I'm going to end on that note, but this was kind of, trying to look at how I stumbled upon this material. Since this was supposed to be a History Wala's talk, I wanted to keep it slightly relevant to questions around working in the archive, questions of working in the absence of plentiful material, and questions around the construction of speculative histories, which have been a long-standing interest for me. There are, of course, other aspects of science fiction cinema that are very important, which I don't want to spend time talking about, which is the more philosophical dimension of it, which is the engagement between self and other, and time and space and so on. If those questions come up in the conversation, we can address them. But I really wanted to focus today's talk on looking at the materiality of the objects stumbled upon in an archive, and how what they have spoken to me so far. So thank you, Basav. I can't see anybody on my screen. So should I just stop sharing the
Yeah, if you can stop sharing, we can move to sort of Q&A. So I mean, there are some questions here, which I'm just going to read it out. First question actually is from me, is I just wanted to I think you touched upon a little bit, but can you probably talk about the aesthetics, like say, film aesthetics of these films that we researched? I mean, of course, some of them you couldn't watch them because of lack of the copy, lack of the film being available. But otherwise, If you can give us an idea of the aesthetics of this genre.
Yeah, so the aesthetics is, as you would guess, I suppose, I mean, I don't know. It depends on how one looks at it, right? I mean, if you want to be a fan of B films, or you are a fan of B films, like I am a fan of, stuff that is not very sophisticated. I really like the rough edgeness of it and so on. There's the aesthetic is very unsophisticated, but it's very edgy. And I forgot to mention this in my talk. There's a set of actors who commonly act across these films, right? And there's something very interesting going on in terms of the body, the human body. When we imagine people going out into outer space, you normally imagine a very really fit, somebody who can breathe under conditions of no oxygen, or very low oxygen or whatever. None of these films imagine their astronauts like that, right? And there are multiple kinds of films. They're not just films about people going out into space, but other kinds of biological warfare, devices of destruction, those kinds of films also. The Godzilla kind of film also, which that I don't know if you noticed in that poster, but there was Fort area Kala Ghoda, which was flooded, and right. So there's also something quite specific about the urban locations within which things take place. For example, Wahan Ke Log is a Delhi-based film, right? So you see the UFOs kind of descending upon Delhi and so on. So it's not a Blade Runner kind of postmodern sci-fi imaginary. It's very much even when they go out onto the moon, it's like they've gone into the garden next door kind of thing, right? So it's the aesthetic imaginary is not it's I mean, you saw in Wahan Ke Log that there's like little gadgets and things. So I find that really interesting, that it's not a sophisticated imagination, right? It's not your Ravan, it's not your the post 2000 kind of high budget action hero blockbuster, high definition, high gloss kind of thing. And that is exactly the kind of thing that this is not, right? Which is why it becomes really interesting. So the bodies that I was talking about, one of the actors that you'll find in pretty much every science fiction film, by and large, let's say 80%, is Bhagwan. Yeah? And there is Dara Singh.
Yeah, I was saying Dara Singh. Bhagwan was a little bit surprised.
Yeah. Helen is there in many films. And there is the actress Shakila, not the Shakila of the Malayalam cinema, but another Shakila. And it's very fascinating about, so on the one hand, you have Dara Singh, who's of course there in Trip to the Moon, which is available on YouTube to watch. And Helen is also in that film. So, it's like, if you are curious about the aesthetics of these films, that's a great film to kind of comprehend those. So on the one hand, you have Dara Singh's muscularity. The main rationale for making a film would be to show Dara Singh's body, right? Any film with Dara Singh is a bit like that. And on the other hand, you have somebody like Bhagwan, who also then kind of becomes, the visible body in so many ways. So there's something very interesting going on in terms of the idea of the human body and excesses of the body, which you will not find in the more mainstream kind of film. So yeah, to answer your question about the aesthetics, that is what it is. It's like what you would find in a fantasy film, right? So you can actually draw a long arch from Falke's experiments, because that was experimental,
yeah,
to the fantasy and the Wadia, brothers films, to these films, the mythologicals also, because Babubhai Misri worked across mythologicals and action. And in the 70s, these films disappear. Okay, so there is no more this genre of cinema being made, but a lot of horror films that are made. So you have the Ramsay brothers. So every decade, loosely, broadly speaking, of Indian cinema has its own unique craft industry-ness, right? However, I mean, one has to look at like the history of industrial production, not the industrial in terms of the mainstream, but all these B genres. The industrial structure remains common and similar across these films until the 1980s. But in the 1990s, which I think is a pivotal kind of decade when, both technology starts transitioning towards digital, as well as the industrial process starts changing, things really then undergo a change. So I hope that somehow a little bit addresses your question.
Yeah. So, but I just one more question on the aesthetics. Like I was interested, someone else also asked this question, is about they had songs, right? So songs within science fiction, and I mean in the new age post 2000 science fiction, the songs are different. They are almost in tune with the mechanicalness of the film, right? But how were these, they look like romantic numbers and stuff like that, right? And with Mukesh and Rafi and people like that singing, and also, were there comedy, like how at that time comedy was pushed into all kind of genres,
Yeah.
as a side track, right? So and were any of these films color? So these were the sort of the sub questions under aesthetics.
Yeah. So some of these films were color because 60s was the also that period of transition where color films were being made. So you'll find a hodgepodge of color and black and white. And the use of song actually is very interesting because you're right that it is a romantic story, right? So, and this is the very interesting aspect because in a lot of academic work done on Hollywood science fiction, or let's say, and I use this term Western very broadly and irresponsibly actually, um, there is the affective charge or the erotic charge in science fiction films has been theorized by various people, which I'm not going to kind of dump names here. So, is really a displaced charge, right? So it's like the phallic nature of the spacecraft, or if you look at a film like Alien, there's a lot of kind of thing going on around giving birth, motherhood, right, the corporeality of the body and so on. But these are all displaced, whereas in none of the Indian science fiction films that does that displacement take place, right? So the erotic charge and the romantic charge is still enacted between people. It isn't transferred on to machines or so that is also, again, now one could say that that is the inability or the lack of possibility of actually making a real science fiction film, right? Because these films could be any kind of film. There is but there is of course a huge kind of moral ethical question pegged. There are questions of nationhood, India versus other countries, again, because of the wars and so on. But there's also a certain Asian sensibility, or in a very loose, broad way, because the influence of Japan cannot be ignored in this whole area of animation. And right, so I think that is very interesting in terms of the use of how the use of music actually has persisted across genres in Indian cinema, irrespective of what genre you're uh, looking at, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So there was a question from Dr. Ipsita. Is a very, yeah. So her question is, what was generally the production economy of these films? Were they mainstream or B-grade? Also, if you can comment on the audience reception of these films. I just want to add to that question, like, were there any of these films also, like stars of that time acting in it, or why, or if not, why not?
I think that's a very good and important question. So there's a film called Mr. X in Bombay, which has Kishore Kumar, and there's one film with Tanuja. But that's as far as it comes to the mainstream stars of that time, even courting the possibility of acting, right? And Kishore Kumar is very much a fringe character. Like he's done all kinds of things, and possibly one of the most exciting actors of that time in terms of uh, I know we won't get into Kishore Kumar now, but yeah. So no, the major stars you will never see Shami Kapoor Although you could very much visualize a Shammi Kapoor in a film like this, but no, or no, Rajesh Khanna. So there was always that clear segregation. So these are two industries. I'll go back to Ipshita's question. Actually, Ipshita has done a PhD on science fiction cinema. So I think she will probably be able to answer these questions better than me. Uh, but just to say that the economic um, structure or system was not very dissimilar to what Valentina Vitali has worked on and written about in the context of action films, right? So it very much worked in a similar kind of way. So it wasn't the surplus. So again, I mean, this might get too technical in the sense that if you look at the history of science fiction films and how they actually begin in the Hollywood film industry, it's like the quickie film, right? When to use excess resources. So you have a major production studio and which is making the main film, but there is a little bit of time left, that 2 hours in the day left, and you want to utilize the equipment and the facilities to its maximum capacity. That's how a lot of the even the noir and science fiction films started as the second film. In the Indian case, I mean, Ipshita, I'm not sure if that is really a question, but it didn't work like that, and you will know this. So the production context of all action mythological is a very different arrangement, and it was also very fluid in terms of a lot also depended on friendship, right? On leveraging the generosity of people. Now it's very difficult to write these histories because where are the documents? And many of the people who one would have gone and spoken to are no more also. So it's really like groping in the dark in many ways, and trying to put together through multiple forms an account that is always going to be an estimate but never quite the account, which is also the exciting part of it, because I think that is been the critique of history, that even though it's a narrative, it's seen as being something quite absolute, right? So yeah, Ipshita, good, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
for the
absolutely.
question. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, Ipshita, if you want to say something, please go ahead.
No, please continue. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I think I mean, the curiosity there by one more person also who asked this question was about how, I mean, were they not successful? Because why did they stay B grade? I mean, did they become blockbusters? And, so were there any of them become blockbusters is the question, I guess. So why did they remain B grade, even if they started as B grade?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, there are multiple possible answers to this. One is the star economy. As you know that, that's been a curse for us, right? So unless you have the major stars, you don't have a hope in hell of becoming a blockbuster. Like, I mean, and in that, during those days, blockbuster was not only measured by revenue, but also how long it stayed in the cinemas, right? So silver jubilee, golden jubilee, all of that kind of stuff. So I don't think that I'm in a position to comment on the kind of economics of these films, because I don't really know them off the top of my head. But speculative responses to why they didn't become blockbusters is A, the production value, B, that they didn't actually work within the star system kind of logic. The stars were peripheral, and how many times is somebody, you can be a hardcore Bhagwan fan. I know Dara Singh had a huge fan following, which was really a hardcore fan following, but it was a niche fan following. So I think the logics of how niche were these films, who would want to watch them, were they family viewing films, right? All those kinds of issues, exhibition, distribution, how long would a theater even show these films? So I think all of those kinds of questions, but I think the big question is, where are these films also now, right? And that really is anyway.
So I just want Mr. Darpan has asked a question about Your thoughts on idea of jugaad in the digital age. Also, do you think there are any merits to working with limitations on digital platforms / resources?
Yeah. Merits to, I mean, I think they're two very different animals, right? Two different creatures. So it would be like comparing apples and oranges. A jugaad is everywhere. I think there is enough and more jugaad in the on digital platforms. In fact, um, I'm just recollecting something that a friend has written about in an article about, Wolverine, this film, which, and this is a very popular account apparently, where during the special effects that were being worked on, this is somebody who writes on piracy, a copy of that film leaked out, or a clip of that film leaked out with actually all the kind of, special effects in process. This was a digital copy. So you saw Wolverine with, like, those wires on his head, and this had leaked out before the film was released. So there is enough, the same questions of not materiality in the analog sense, but the digital materiality, however one understands that, I think crossover into both realms. And so of course jugaad is, uh, continues to be a very important aspect of what one does and how one does it. There's one last question at the bottom, I'll just answer that quickly, about which was the film with Dara Singh and Helen, that is Trip to the Moon, or Chant Pe Chadai, which is there on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is a question from Purvi Gaur. She's asking, could you talk a bit about how does one work against the grain, in the sense that when there is little to no material available, how do you, as a film scholar, work with a constantly limiting archive, especially when trying to reconstruct feminist histories?
Yeah. Thanks, Purvi. I think, I mean, that's really $1 million question. And for about many decades now, scholars in India have broken their head over impoverished archives, archives that catch fire. You will know this, that the National Film Archive has caught fire multiple times. And so I think this is also a bit of a jugaad response, going back to Darpan's question, that what does one do when, I mean, let's say we had like the best archive in the world, right? Let's say we had everything that we wanted. I don't think any of us would be complaining about it, right? So, but we don't. And this is obviously a situation that is not uniquely Indian. It is common across many other countries which were colonized or have a different relationship to ideas of history itself and preservation. I think you can't separate any of those concepts from our attitude to documenting, preserving, and so on, which is full of possibilities. But these are possibilities created under situations of duress. So once you don't have everything, then how do you do it? I think, and this is a kind of bit of a departure that I think film historians make vis-a-vis historians, that speculation becomes a lot more acceptable because that's the only way of doing it, right? And this is also a little bit of the kind of conversation between fiction and documentary, and how fiction bleeds into documentary, and vice versa. So I would look at this situation a little bit like that, that one works with narratives, and if there are gaps, and there are bound to be gaps, then one looks at it as a narrative in process or in progress. It's a shifting narrative, it's not a settled narrative, and so there is always scope for more work. One has to work in very roundabout ways, like, you really have to, I mean, I was showing you those song booklets and things, so you really have to look at each name and try and find out anything that you can about anybody there, or any, so it's really like a lot of work. Whereas had we had a very wonderfully organized and complete archive, then your work would only be then, or would be made a little bit simpler, because you would then have to be narrating a history. Here we have to go, excavating. So we're doing the work of archaeologists as well as historians, right? So that's how you do it. And you go a bit with your intuition, you go knock on any door you can, you find friends, relatives of the person you're looking for, you make phone calls and you look at documents and other kinds of things. And you hope that someday maybe the film itself will show up. But I think what this kind of situation of duress has made, at least in Indian film scholars do, is to be rather innovative in their methodology. Because you're not just looking at the film as the text in the archive, you're really looking at a lot of other material because the films aren't always there. So, yeah.
Yeah, but also there is a question of access anyways. I mean, even though National Film Archives is a public archives, as you know, it's very restricted access and not everyone can get an access unless you have a university affiliation or a reason for research, right? That's I think there's a continuation of the same question as to the whole process of digging, exploring. I wanted to ask you if you thought of, or if you imagined, or if you at least tried to do a oral history exercise as well around this, to see if they could find some fans at least to talk about these films, or
That
if you
would be very
collected any.
interesting. I haven't done it yet, but I think that would definitely be a very interesting project. Maybe we should talk about that.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So there is another question. Oh, that's it. I think that was the question. Right. Yes. So if you want to say anything about the whole process of actually digging, exploring. So what kind of material is available? One is the song booklets and the scripts you mentioned.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, and some of the films are available in NFI. Right?
Yeah, and some are now on two or three are on YouTube now. Some of the films are there. Very few of the films are there. Mostly it's song booklets, publicity material, stills, scripts are thankfully there, but it's very difficult to get the scripts out. So, I mean, it's another whole, I hope there's nobody from NFI here. It's another whole training to learn to navigate and deal with that archive, right? It's you have to become an expert in many things. So, which includes making friends in the archive. And yeah, so I cannot share all of this on recorded conversation, but off the record, I'll be very happy to talk about it.
Okay, great. So I think that's it from a questions perspective in general. I don't see any other question. So if anyone else has a comment or a question, this is the time to ask. You're open to also unmute yourself and speak if you find typing a little tedious. So one question I have, Rashmi, in between, I'm just using this chance to ask questions that I have had, is that so after your work and after you publishing this and all, have you seen any other researcher work continuing this work or in this genre?
Yeah, actually there's quite a lot. I mean, that is now emerging and has been emerging in the B kind of film scene. A lot of work has been done on horror. Karthik Nair has done his PhD on horror films, and there are Ipshita herself has worked on sci-fi films, so she's very much the person to turn to. There is a lot of new material, and there's always been old material on mythologicals and action films that Rosie Thomas has done, and those kinds of things, and action films that Valentina Vitali has done. Specifically vis-a-vis science fiction, I think Raminder Kaur has done some work, Anustup Basu has done some work, and then there is work on the contemporary body of the action sci-fi films, the superhero sci-fi films, which is in itself very fascinating for a whole different set of reasons. In fact, Ashish has a paper on Ravan and Shah Rukh Khan and things. So there is work. After I edited this journal issue, I actually got interested in looking at science fiction cinema in what I'll loosely call the global south, which is not the global south, but I happened to go to Turkey for a brief fellowship, and I started looking at Turkish science fiction films there, and which was again very interesting in terms of this kind of consistent apparent lack of sophistication, but a great sophistication around cultures of pastiche and parody and all of that. And found some very remarkable science fiction films coming out of Latin America, actually. So I've been trying to explore in different geographical contexts, not just Japan, which we know, and I haven't really made great headway in the more kind of transnational exploration of the material. But I'm certainly fascinated by Afrofuturism and now emerging body of work on Islamic science fiction, right? Which goes back to the whole question around whose science is the legitimate science. And this is the core crux of it. Which version of science are you talking about when you talk about science fiction? There are multiple ways to understand time, space. So in a much longer kind of trajectory and framework, it's about, so one of the books that Ziauddin Sardar and Sean Cubitt have edited is called Aliens Are Us, and in which they argue that all Western science, Hollywood science fiction films portray the other as the racial other, or the colonized, formerly colonized, and so on. So of course, I mean, that we know that science fiction is about the self's relationship with the other, the fear of the other, the fear of the self, and the other metamorphizing into each other in some sense, right? The old Frankenstein story of man and machine. So that, yes, of course, is there. But I think there's a whole kind of, the debate is, science is universal. There isn't, the laws of physics are the same in New York as they are in Tokyo or Bangalore. But the relationship between that universal science and the cultural fiction is what becomes interesting in different geographical regions. So sorry, I mean, this has been like a really long-winded response to your...
No, the good, and actually that reminds me of one more question I was thinking was, when in these B-grade science fiction of 60s, were there any, I mean, I don't know if there were any attempts to mix Indian religiosity or indigenous knowledge into the narrative in some or the other way?
Actually, you see that in that Prayoga, cinema of Prayoga, right? Not very much in the... So yeah, so that mixing between alleged indigenous knowledge and the ancient, glorious Indian history and science, and that is not happening in these films. They're reasonably clear that, of course, yes, aliens and all of that is there. Humans, non-humans, extraterrestrial, whatever, all of that is there, but there is no, you will not see Lord Rama fly in suddenly, and or somebody else, Hanuman, fly in and all. So no, there is, or indigenous religiosity, if you mean it in a tribal kind of sense, even that is not.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. I mean, I meant in terms of like putting that conflict into the narrative. The modern scientific knowledge system versus the traditional knowledge system.
Okay. I haven't observed that. It's been about there are a lot of double scientists in all. There's always a double role. I mean, not double role in terms of same actor, but there's the good scientist and the
two
bad
protagonists.
scientist.
Yeah.
So I think that it gets enacted in that kind of metaphorical way. The conflict gets enacted through a metaphor as opposed to actual.
Yeah, like Dr. Shaitan, no? Dr. Ashok versus Dr. Shaitan. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much. I think we have already overshot the time a little bit. So if there are no other responses or questions, I think it's time to thank you, Rashmi, again for being generous with your time with us. And thank you everyone for making time to attend. And hopefully we'll also, I will probably send a link to everyone who attended about your paper. I think there is a link on the internet, so I can send it across for people.
Yeah, but it's behind a paywall, so...
Oh, okay.
But I know it may be there somewhere. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's there. Okay. Thanks, Basav, and thanks to everyone for attending. I see some friends and some students. So thank you and have a nice Saturday evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Yeah.